We're just really pleased to start the summit off today with our very own Melissa Fincher. And you all know Melissa. She doesn't need any introduction. She is Miss Georgia Assessment. I could just tell you that. She talks about leaving multiple choice world, and that we're going to leave that world, even though there's nothing wrong with multiple choice. There's nothing wrong. You'll still see some of that on student assessments. But she's going to bring you up to date on the kinds of things that are going on in assessment, the types of things that Race to the Top has funded and in the area of assessment. And we need to congratulate Melissa because she recently received her doctorate from Georgia State University. When you're in the middle of that process, as many of you know, it's like there's this black cloud hanging over you, and you think, if I never finish, my life is over. And then when you finish, it's like, yes, I did it. So congratulations, Melissa. We're really proud of you. So without any further ado, we'll have Melissa come forward and talk to you and tell you everything you ever wanted to know about assessment. Melissa?
At 8:30 in the morning, at the beach, no less. So when I look at the title, Formative Assessment, Benchmark Assessments, and More, I think I need to say, oh my. So yeah, it is 8:30 in the morning. We're going to talk about assessments, and I feel the need to apologize. But we're talking about the good aspect of assessment. We're talking about using assessments to improve instruction. So with that, I'm going to talk about Race to the Top and what our initiatives are within the Race to the Top. I do want to talk to you at the end a little bit about the CRCT readiness indicators that Dr. Barge talked about yesterday, because you will be getting those data in a couple of weeks. So I want to make sure that you're prepared for that, and then we'll throw it open in any questions you have. And if you know me, you know that anything's fair game. I won't necessarily have an answer. I may not have an answer that you like. But if I can help you, I certainly will. So let's talk about the toolkit that we are building as part of Race to the Top. There are 3 components to this toolkit, and the entire purpose of this work is really to rebalance our assessment system in the state of Georgia. I think you'd all agree with me that we've gotten a little bit out of sync with summative assessments driving everything, and I'm not sure that we haven't had some really negative unintended consequence from that intense focus on those single summative assessments that occur at the end of the year. So with Race to the Top, we saw an opportunity to really work towards a more cohesive and comprehensive assessment system. And that is indeed what we're working towards. We are using our state Race to the Top dollars to build formative items to put into the online assessment system. We've heard you for many years as we transitioned from QCC to GPS. The bank became what I call anemic. There wasn't a lot of high quality content there. There were certain areas that we were able to infuse with GPS, for instance, Math 1 and Math 2, courtesy of the Gates Foundation. They gave us money to build items for that. So we were able to infuse pure GPS content at certain content areas and grades, but then there were other grades, particularly science and social studies, that kind of have remained anemic, and we're using this opportunity to really infuse new content into the bank. So formative items available for teachers to use in the classroom through the OAS. I will acknowledge up front that the OAS is less than stellar, shall we say, in terms of the computer system. It sometimes operates like it was built in 1970s, and it wasn't. We didn't have the internet then. But we're working on that. Bob Swigham's shop is going to bring it into the longitudinal data system, and they're working on a solution. I do want to encourage you, even though you may find the system itself antiquated, to still use the resources within OAS. Remember that if nothing else, you can print. You can go in there, look for items to use with students, and you can print those items. You can use them as warm-up or teasers, those types of things. Really feel the need, and if you've heard me over the last year and a half, I'm nothing if not repetitive. We have got to get our kids into working with open-ended items. This is going to be the game changer for our state. Our kids are not prepared, and I'll show you data that we've shared before where it's alarming how our kids are doing. So those formative tools are there for teachers to use in the classroom at their discretion. We are also building benchmark assessments. That's a need that we heard loud and clear. So our first pilot of those assessments, and you remember last spring we tried to sneak that in on you, and you didn't want it to happen, and that's understandable. We knew we were in dangerous territory there. But as your folks return to school in August and September, we'll have our first pilot. I would love to say that you don't have to participate if you were selected, and about 160 districts were selected across the state. Unfortunately, we can't build these resources without you and your students. So we do need you to participate. We will work with you. We try to make it very manageable. I think no school is asked to test more than 90 students. We've tried to keep it to one grade, one content area. There are some schools where we needed them to test 2 groups of students, but we very much tried to keep it manageable. No students will be required to assess for more than 60 minutes. Please know that I understand this is on top of everything else that you're doing with SLOs and your own work. However, again, we can't build these resources without your students. So we do need you to participate. And then the third part of the toolkit is formative instructional practices. And that's a professional learning opportunity that we just released statewide this month. Actually, I think we did squeak it in June. And that is an online series of modules that focus on the appropriate use of assessment to drive teaching and learning. So we know that we are an assessment illiterate society. But everything hinges on assessment, right? But we don't know how to use assessment as effectively as we should, particularly in the classroom, and it's through no fault of anyone's. If I said this the other day in my session, how many of you took assessment courses as you were in your pre-service work or working on your master's or on? You all took assessment work. You all learned about assessment from the large scale point of view. So you learned how to calculate the standard error of measure. You learned how to calculate the reliability indices and the series of indices that you have. You remember the Cooter-Richardson. I'd just like to say that name, Cooter-Richardson. And the Cooter-Richardson 21. That has no practicality in the classroom. That has no practicality in the classroom. What you need to know is how to match the expectation with the right tool, the right type of item, and how to build a good item, and then how to use that information to refine instruction and to engage students in their learning. And so that's what this series of modules is all about. So with that, you've all seen this before. You know the cycle of assessment, that we want to assess periodically and gauge where students are in their understanding so that we really can move them along the path towards proficiency. So it's an ongoing cycle. The one thing that we need to remind people of, and I think this is where we've kind of gotten hung up a little bit in our state, is that assessment is a process, not an event. Even though test is a 4-letter word, assessment can be informal, and true formative assessment really is informal. It's the teacher gauging where the student is. It's the student using the assessment process to gauge where they are in their own learning. And it's an informal evaluation that's personal, and it's the action that you take from that and the changes that we make as a result of that new information that we collect on a daily basis that makes it formative and that makes it really, really rich. And I know you guys are all very familiar with all of the great research that is out there on the power of formative assessment. So the purpose of our toolkit really is to build high-quality resources to reflect our state curriculum, to make them available free of charge to all districts in the state of Georgia. We really want to rebalance our assessment system and move away from the exclusive focus on just summative assessment and practice assessments for those summative assessments, early warning systems of assessment, to really making sure that, again, those informal observations are going on in the classroom and that teachers have the tools necessary to gather high quality information about student understanding and take appropriate actions as a result of that. So the purpose is to promote student learning and then to help sustain us on our path as we work towards improvement in our state. So if you look inside the formative assessment toolbox, we are building that expansive bank of items. Our first phase, we did a pilot in February of 2012. We also did a pilot of an additional 900 items this past February. Those new 900 items will be put into the OAS this fall as you return. So they're being loaded into the OAS, and it does take us a while because there's some different item formats, but there will be even more content available for teachers to use formatively in the fall. We're building a set of benchmarks, and I'll go into more detail and tell you which content areas and which grade levels we're building benchmarks. We've worked with a committee of advisors from your district to prioritize how we should build the benchmarks, what should we focus on, which grades and content areas should roll out first, and which we can wait on. And so I'll let you know what that is. Now we'll be, as I mentioned, we're going to be having that first phase of the pilot this fall. It's going to be an off-grade pilot, and that's going to be very important because students need to have had the opportunity to learn the content. We don't want to test students on content they've not had the opportunity to learn, particularly when we're trying to evaluate how well the items function. So if a student is in the 5th grade in August of 2013 and their school is selected to participate in the pilot, and you're asked to assess, let's say, 90 5th graders at your school, those 5th graders will take the 4th grade benchmark in whatever content area has been assigned. Does that make sense? So they've had the exposure to the 4th grade content. That's what they're going to be assessed on. What's going to take a little bit more logistical planning is in the high school, because you know our courses aren't tied to specific grades. So we want, if we're testing coordinate algebra, and coordinate algebra was a high priority area that was identified by the advisory committee, we want to find those students who have had coordinate algebra. Now, that's probably not the best example because most of them are 9th graders, right? So we know they're going to be in 10th grade. But let's just take U.S. history. That's another high need area in our state. You know, the high school graduation test in social studies, even though it is being phased out, has become the gatekeeper. That's the test for some reason that students struggle the most with. So we identified that with the committee as a high priority. We need resources in U.S. history to help students. Even though we're phasing that test out, we still have large numbers of students who haven't been successful. So you need to find those kids that have had the U.S. history course, and those are the ones that will participate in the pilot of the U.S. history benchmark. Let me just stop there and remind you that with the phase out of the high school graduation test, we did release about 200 U.S. history items from the Georgia High School Graduation Test Bank into the OAS about a year and a half ago. Again, we're trying to give you resources and really target those resources to where we see students are struggling statewide. So that was an area of need, and we did release items into that. Again, I'm also going to encourage you, and you've probably heard me say this, go where the content is. Do not be bounded by grade levels. Knowledge is not discrete, and knowledge is not bounded by a grade level. So if I'm a 6th grade teacher, but there are really good items covering a concept in another grade level bank, and they're appropriate, I review those items and they're appropriate for my students, use them. Don't be bounded by grade levels. We sometimes don't allow ourselves to think outside of the box, so to speak. Okay, and then the other thing that we did is with this assessment literacy, and that's the formative instructional practices. We piloted that with a group of 10 systems to see how we should best recommend rolling that out statewide. We wanted to make sure that the content was appropriate. We don't want these resources to be seen as something that the state's forcing down the throats of folks. It won't be successful if that's the case. We really want these resources to be seen as opportunities. We know that teachers are using formative assessment. It's not like we've come in with our white horse and, we're here to save the day. This is just an opportunity to refine those skills and kind of reset the balance. We're way from AYP now. We've got the College and Career Readiness Index that gives a broader perspective of how we're each doing in our schools. So let's kind of recalibrate. So this is an opportunity for teachers to kind of think about their practice, reset those scales. But I know that we're probably not going to impart any information that they don't already know, but hopefully they can refocus and engage in some critical dialogue about their professional practice and use that as an opportunity. Free of charge. So, we all know Robert Marzano, and really formative assessment is just a critical part of what any teacher uses day to day in the classroom to improve teaching and learning. So let's take I'm going to use one of those buzzwords, deeper dive into the formative item bank. Again, we want to provide tools that teachers can use at their discretion periodically when they see fit to gauge where students are in their learning during instruction and make the appropriate changes. We also want to take this opportunity to provide items that are going to reflect what we anticipate in 14-15, whether we go with Park or not. The landscape of assessment is going to change. And we've already gotten a sneak, so to speak, into that with coordinate algebra. And so I wish I had words of wisdom to offer you in terms of coordinate algebra for those teachers in other content areas. What I've told the coordinate algebra teachers is now they're going to feel your pain as well eventually in 14-15. We've got to increase our rigor, and that is going to be a struggle for us. But as Dr. Barge said, when the next NAEP mapping study comes out, Georgia will have the lowest cut scores in the nation. And surprisingly, one area where we're going to have, I think we all know that we have low cut scores in reading, right? That's a given. I don't think anybody's here going to argue that our cut scores don't need to be increased in reading. But one content area and one grade level where we're going to be the lowest in the nation is in grade 8 math. And I want you to think back to 2008 when the results of grade 8 math came out. And now here it is 2013, and this will be based on the 2011 NAEP administration. We will have the lowest cuts in grade 8 math in the nation. So we've got to raise the rigor, but we've got to do it responsibly, and I don't want you to think that we're just being arbitrary and capricious. We work with Georgia educators to set those expectations. At the same time, we need to know what's coming down the pike, and we need to prepare for it. So the formative item bank is designed to lead us in that direction and provide sample items, particularly those open-ended performance-based items. Can we go back to the presentation? And so using those. Now what we've heard a lot is, well, those require a lot more time for teachers to score. So teachers are hesitant to use that because, gosh, we've just had a couple of years that are like none other, right? With all the changes, we don't have the resources we used to have, and yet we've got about, triple the changes that are going on. So let's think outside of the box, and I'm sure many of you are already doing this. Maybe the teacher doesn't score each of the samples, and I'm not suggesting that everything that we do is open-ended, but what if we have the students practice with some open-ended items and then give them the rubric and give the students the exemplars and have them score their own? have them evaluate their own, have them discuss, compare their responses to the exemplars. What were their strengths and weaknesses? And that way the teacher's not up until 3 in the morning grading open-ended responses. Let's just, use it as a teaching opportunity, but let's think outside the box. I do want to strongly encourage you to begin to sprinkle, and I've used this word before, open-ended items in what they're doing. It's opening problems or closing problems, that type of things, and then find a way to give the students that high-quality feedback. If we want to look into the black box of what's going on in student learning, the best way to do that is through open-ended items where students have to write out their logic, their approach, their reasoning, and we can see very clearly what their understandings or misunderstandings are. So at the end of the day, we're going to have about 1,600 new items in the OAS in ELA and mathematics. These were created exclusively for us in Georgia. We have used everything that we've learned about PARC